Are you looking for professional level recordings, but don't have the $250,000+ to drop on your studio? Look no further than the Universal Audio Apollo family of interfaces. With a form factor for every user, stellar preamps and industry-leading converters, and plugins, if you can't get a great recording with an Apollo, it would be more of an issue with your mixing and tracking technique than the gear itself. So let's do a deep dive into the Apollo line and demystify it.
All right! Woo! Yes!
If after watching these videos you'd like to purchase an Apollo, or if you have any other questions, you can actually email me directly. That email address is ryan.sloan@thegearcage.com, and I welcome any questions. Let's start by talking about the plethora of hardware options in the Apollo family. Whether you're working by yourself, or in a project studio, or tracking full bands, or just need to track demo ideas, Universal Audio has you covered with the right product. Let's get started with the Apollo Solo and Twin series. The Solo and Twin offer you a great way to break into an Apollo and work on demos or get a high horsepower portable rig that will complement your main studio rig. The Apollo Solo features 2 inputs and 2 outputs. It also has an instrument DI on the front, as well as a headphone output, and comes with Thunderbolt 3 on a Mac or a USB-C version if you want to use it on a PC. The biggest drawback of the Solo is that it's only available with one DSP processing chip. This means you don't really have a lot of headroom available when it comes to mixing or tracking because you won't get very far with a single DSP. I view the Apollo Solo as a great sketch pad for doing small scale demo work. The takeaway is that the Solo should really only be used if budget is absolutely a limiting factor, as the DSP just gives you too many limitations for doing serious work. Now, the $499 price point is a great way to get started in the Apollo family though. Now let's talk about the Apollo Twin. The Twin is where things start to get really interesting. You have upgraded input and outputs, which we'll call I/O for inputs and outputs, functionality as well as DSP potential. The Apollo Twin gives you 2 microphone and combo TRS inputs. Like the Solo, it gives you 4 total audio outputs built in and has an instrument DI and headphone output. It also has an optical input, so if you were to add external converters such as the Audient ASP880, you can actually get 10 amazing sounding inputs at one time going into your recording setup. There are a few different versions of the Apollo Twin beyond just the I/O. So let's talk about those for just a second. The Apollo Twin USB Duo is their PC version of the Apollo. It features 2 DSP processing chips, which is why it's called the Apollo Twin USB Duo. And it does have a slightly older preamp design and converter. So while it sounds great, it doesn't quite compare to the Apollo Twin X series interfaces. But if you're on a PC and want a small format interface, it's still the best value at the given price, in my opinion, if you're looking for pro level results. On the Mac side, there are 3 Apollo Twin interface models available. There is an Apollo Duo Mark II, and the Apollo Twin X Duo, and the Apollo Twin X Quad. Now I know that sounds crazy, but let's dig into exactly what those are. The Apollo Twin Mark II Duo has the same core features as the Apollo Twin USB on a PC that we just spoke about in terms of I/O. But It does feature their Mark II converter and preamp circuit, which sounds very close to the twin USB Duo. It's the cheapest way to get a twin on the Mac right now at $799. That said, I would actually avoid this model if you can in lieu of the next model. The Apollo Twin X Duo and Quad are the latest generation Apollo Twin available on a Mac. They're also the same as the other models in terms of inputs and outputs, but they do feature top-of-the-line converters and preamps, so you'll get the best sound quality with these two units. The Twin X Quad is actually capable of doing some really solid work. You could actually do professional mixes on it. They're priced at $899 and $1,399 right at the moment respectively. All three Apollo Twin models will also work directly with the Luna recording system. Now let's take a second and talk about a newer option here for their interfaces, and that's called the Apollo X4. Now, the X4 fits somewhere in the middle of the rack mount units and the desktop twin and solo units. It features 4 combo unison XLR 1/4 inch inputs and 2 instrument DI inputs on the front and 2 headphone outputs, as well as 6 other 1/4 inch outputs and an optical input and output. The Apollo X4 also comes with a quad DSP processor and works with Luna. They come in at $1799. Next, let's talk about the Apollo rack mount interfaces. The Apollo rack mount interfaces they all have slight variations that are definitely worth digging into. The X6 is the first model available. It has 2 DI inputs as well as 2 headphone outputs, and does come with the 6-core hexa-core processor. So it actually has 6 DSP chips on board. The biggest drawback of this interface is the fact that it only has 2 unison microphone preamps. So it's almost more geared for mixing and not so much for tracking. Or you can use the 6-line inputs on the back if you have a lot of existing outboard gear to run directly into it. It features 8 analog audio outputs and does have a SPDIF input and output as well as optical inputs and outputs. It features a Thunderbolt 3 connection as well as an external power supply. It's priced at $2199. So to get into the Apollo rack mount family with a lot of versatility for inputs and outputs, the Apollo X6 is fantastic for all of that. Next, they have the Apollo X8. This one is actually very, very similar to the X6, but it has 4 preamps instead of 2. It will do 18 inputs and 24 outputs at one time. So it has 4 XLR inputs and 8 line inputs and 10 analog outputs, as well as SPDIF inputs and outputs, and 2 ADAT inputs and 2 ADAT outputs for a lot of versatility when it comes to I/O. It also uses Thunderbolt 3 and also has a 6-core hexa processor for lots of DSP processing potential. The price on this one is $2,699 as of right this moment. The next piece in the lineup is the X8P. This one has the same DI inputs, 2, and headphone outputs, also 2, but it deviates on the regular I/O in some big ways. It features 8 combo XLR TRS inputs that also act as unison preamps. It has 2 analog 1/4 inch outputs, but also has DB25 inputs and outputs for connecting lots of external gear and keeping the connections as concise as possible. The X8P does drop the SPDIF inputs and outputs, but does still retain the ADAT optical inputs and outputs. It will do 16 inputs and 22 outputs at the same time and is priced at $32.99 currently. You can also use Luna with the X8P and in general all of the Thunderbolt Mac interfaces as of the recording of this video. Finally, we have the Apollo 16, and this one deviates from the others in a few big ways. The Apollo X16 is made for probably a more professional studio where you're running lots of external outboard gear. You don't have DI inputs or headphone outputs, and you don't have SPDIF or ADAT inputs or outputs. But you do have 4 DB25 connections on the back that will handle 16 analog channels in and 16 channels out at one time. The Apollo 16 has the best actual sound quality converter-wise of the whole Apollo line as well, and is very comparable to an Apogee or Lynx converter in terms of overall sound quality, but at only $34.99, it's actually a bargain and does still come with the 6-core DSP. So we can see that they have an Apollo product for just about every use case. One thing to note, you can actually stack any of the Apollo products together and take advantage of all of the processing of the units and the I/O through the Apollo console. One other thing I did want to mention about the Apollo interfaces, I did want to talk about the new Heritage Edition SKUs that you'll see out there in the retail world in the wild. And the main reason that these exist right now is due to a fire at the factory where the DSP processing chips are made for the Apollo products. In fact, it basically burned the whole factory to the ground, and there's going to be a chip shortage in some capacity for probably the next year. So to help kind of maybe curb demand a little bit, Universal Audio has released a new bundle, but it's not just a price increase in traditional senses. They're actually giving you some additional plugins in what they call the Heritage Edition bundle. So I'm going to put those on the screen right now so you can see what components come with that. So it really is a nice benefit for the customer, but also will help during the supply issues that they're having with these DSP chips. But I did want to add that after the fact on this video because it is a somewhat recent development. In the next video, let's dig into the software component of the Apollo system and talk about the Apollo console. That's an area where I know a lot of people have questions, so I definitely want to demystify that. And then in the third video, we'll talk a little bit about Luna software and how that ties into the whole idea of the Apollo recording system. So stay tuned for those videos. Thanks again for watching. My name is Ryan Sloan with the Gear Cage, and we'll see you again here soon.